Welcome back to another episode of Is Fitz Happy? I'm Luke.
And I'm Emma.
We're discussing chapter 33 of Ship of Destiny this week. Ship of Destiny.
Yeah.
We get the...
Titular name.
Yeah, the titular name. There you go.
Titular chapter. Is that what it's called?
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, surprise, surprise, we're going to be talking a little bit about Paragon.
Yes, definitely. He comes into play. I told Luke before we started recording, this one feels like a long chapter, but it is, on my book, 22 pages, which is kind of just a regular chapter. There's so much that happens this chapter that it feels really long, but in a good way. It's like, exciting stuff. It just, a lot.
Well, we start with Kennit. And we have just ended the last chapter with Etta saving Rain from the water. And now we are joining Kennit, looking down at this sodden bundle of a man and being like, well, Etta, you found him. You can keep him, I guess.
And after Kennit looks at him a little bit more closely, he's not even sure it is a man.
Right.
It's a creature, and he is not thrilled. This is not the time for them to be worrying about whatever it is the dragon dropped.
Mm-hmm. He's a bit annoyed because Malta kind of brushes up against him and rushes over to him without her head wrap right now and is demanding, like, is he breathing? Is Rain alive? And Kennit looks at the thing on her head and is like, what is that? Then Althea kneels beside Malta. Gingerly, she set her fingers to the side of the man's throat. Her face was still for an instant, and then she smiled up at her niece. Rain is alive, Malta. Wintro had joined them. At Althea's words, he started and then gave his sister an incredulous smile. As Wintro smiled at his sister, something almost like jealousy flitted across Etta's face. In an instant, it was gone. She transferred her gaze to Kennit. Her voice was almost sulky as she said, "You sent for me?" "I did." And Kennit was aware that everyone was kind of following the conversation, including his crew, so he softens his voice and says, "And you came. As you always have." He smiled at her. There, she and the crew could make whatever they wanted out of that. And then he immediately turns back to her and he's like, what is this?
Yeah.
So we get a little moment of jealousy from Etta because Wintro is smiling at another female in her presence, I guess.
Yeah.
Turning his good graces and attention on somebody else, feeling happy for someone else.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what the jealousy would be about, because at first I was thinking, oh, well, she doesn't realize or know maybe that that's his sister.
Right.
So maybe she's jealous because it's just a woman.
Mm-hmm.
But then I was thinking about it, and she knows Althea's his aunt.
Yeah.
And then also Althea seems to know this woman and calls her by name. So
maybe family could be connection there.
Yeah. But maybe she doesn't realize it at first and then realizes later, because I think she's never told that that's Wintro's sister, but eventually she does seem to know it's the sister.
I think also Etta is feeling very lonely at this point because she got sent away, right?
Right.
And is kind of isolated by things that Kennit has done, has said, and, well, he sent her away.
Yeah.
And Wintro was really kind of her only friend. And yes, she likes his attention.
Right.
She really does appreciate that. And Wintro smiling at someone else, acting happy around other people is kind of just an affirmation that, like, oh, I am alone. At least that's what I think.
Okay,
might be going through her head.
Yeah, I think it's hard because I immediately wanted to jump to it being like a feelings, sort like a romantic feeling sort of jealousy.
Could be too.
It absolutely could be, but it didn't feel right. It felt more like jealousy when your friend is with a different friend, I feel like everybody has that. It's very human whenever you see your friend in a different environment and they're paying more attention to their other friends. It does hurt. Obviously you want your friends to have friends.
It's kind of irrational, but yeah, it does hurt,
but I think, I think it's a pretty human feeling to be
definitely
jealous of a friend's relationship with other friends. So
yeah, especially Etta, who that is her only friend.
Yes. Yeah.
So the conversation between Kennit and Etta is describing how the dragon dropped him right by the boat. And Kennit's like, oh yeah, so of course you picked him up. And then one of the men from Sorkor's boat explained nervously, Vivacia said we should. Was King Kennit displeased with him? And then Wintro says the amazing words out loud that he's Rain Cooperus, a Rain Wilder. My sister is betrothed to him. Sa alone knows how he managed to find her here, but he did. Help me turn him over. And eventually the water clears from his lungs and he kind of flips over a little bit and then wheezes out, Malta? And Malta gasps and springs back from him. She threw her hands up before her face. No, she cried out, and then wheeled and jostled her way through the crowd. Etta stared after her in consternation. What was that about? She asked of anyone. So we also get a lot of Rain and Malta in the next couple chapters here.
Yes.
And it starts here where like, oh no, I'm hideous. Rain won't want me. And then Rain's like, oh no, I'm hideous. Malta won't want me.
Yeah, it's the classic misunderstanding where Malta realizes she is not covered, so she tries to cover her head to not be seen, and Rain takes that as she saw his face for the first time and ran away screaming, covering her eyes, shouting no.
Yeah.
So, not the best reunion.
We can't dive into it yet, though, because the Jamaillian ships are spotted returning.
Yes. So when last we saw the Jamaillian ships, they were being sieged upon by the serpents.
Yep. And then the serpents fled with Tintaglia.
Yes. So they were sort of regrouping and taking the time of the serpents going away to help people off of ships that were sinking, but they weren't closing in around Kennit anymore. And now
they're coming, trying to surround his 3 ships.
Again.
Yeah. And he can tell on the decks that there's a telltale scrabble of men readying war machines. So he's like, okay, we're probably going to fight then. Kennit held the satrap as a bargaining chip. It was as good a time as any to challenge the fleet of Jamaillia. Jola, he commanded, get the men back to their posts and have them stand ready. Vivacia was watching, but her mind was elsewhere and asks, how is the Rain Wilder? Alive, he replied briefly. The dragon brought him, here, to me. Wintro seems to think the dragon dropped him off for his sister, Kennit replied acidly. That would make sense, the ship said thoughtfully. They belong together. As much sense as anything that has happened today. What are the odds of such a thing happening, Vivacia? Out of all the ships around us, the dragon drops Malta's beloved by the correct one to find her. And Vivacia replies with some very interesting things. One, that there's nothing random about it. Obviously, the dragon came seeking Malta and kind of found her. And then speaks in a soft voice saying, something hovers here, Kennit. Something even more powerful than the luck you worship. She smiled, but there was sadness in her expression. Destiny knows no odds, she added mysteriously. He had no answer to that, and the very idea of it annoyed him. Destiny was all very well when it meant he would succeed, but today fate seemed to be weighing the balance against him. We get a little, again, I think there's been a couple instances in these books where Vivacia is just a little mysterious about the future and the feeling in the air.
Yeah, I don't know. I think we've talked about it before too, that there just seems to be some weird crossover between like She Who Remembers, Vivacia, and Beloved in their ability to sort of see what's going to happen next.
Or there's like that, a crux moment, some point of crisis that is approaching,
Yeah, it's really interesting because also we know that Paragon with Amber and Brashen are on the other side of the Jamaillian fleet.
Yes, they're following behind.
Yes, they're coming the same direction, coming towards Kennit. But Amber was talking about feeling this moment building, and obviously Amber sensed it a lot earlier than anybody else, probably because they're a white prophet. Yeah. And they're trained in it. But it's really interesting to see so many other people and beings sort of comment on it as well.
And they're all beings that are familiar with not just like the skill or not just the wit, but like a different magic that encompasses more.
Yes. Whatever the silver is, which I guess Fitz says is a river of skill,
Yeah.
but I think that's just like,
What he can interpret it as.
yeah, it's something different. I think it's definitely different. It's just what he interprets, like you said.
Mhm.
And so I think it's people who have sort of a closeness with that.
Although the whites don't necessarily have that.
Well, but Beloved has coated hands.
Right, but even before that, Beloved could kind of feel those moments too. So I think it's people who have that closeness to whatever the skill, like you were talking about, the silver, and then also the whites who have that just innate ability, prophetic ability.
Yeah, something about it seems really natural. Like, I mean, I guess if you think about it, the silver is coming from the earth in this world, right? So it's something about the natural world order, presumably.
Mm-hmm.
Either way, Kennit is kind of creeped out, and he hears Etta approaching and demands that she brings Malta and the satrap to him.
And she didn't reply, so Kennet's kind of like, what's with you today, basically?
Yeah, he's wondering what's wrong with her. He just says, well, and in his head is wondering why she's acting so weird. He'd brought her back to the ship. What more could she want from him? Why must she want it right now? I have something to tell you. It's important. More important than our survival? He glanced back at the oncoming ships. Would they halt and parley first or just attack? Best not to take a chance. Send Jola and Wintro to me as well, he commanded her. I shall, she promised. She took a breath and added, I'm pregnant. I carry your child. Then she turned and walked away from him. Her words froze time around him. Yeah, so that's the announcement. That's her sharing the news.
Mm-hmm.
And Kennit is very shocked.
Yeah, his mind is a whirl here, and he goes through a lot of different thoughts and feelings. And in his head, the way that this is described is that so many paths spread out from this instant and in so many directions. A baby, a child, the seed of a family. He could be a father, as his own father had been. No, better. He could protect his own son. His father had tried to protect him, but his father had failed. He could be a king and his son a prince. Or he could be rid of Etta, take her somewhere, leave her there and go on with no one to depend on him, no one he could fail. His thoughts did not spin. They rattled in his brain like stones. Maybe she was lying. Maybe she was wrong. Did he want a child? What if it was a girl? Would you still name her Paragon? The charm on his wrist whispered viciously. It gave a low laugh. Destiny no longer hovers. Some of it has flown off with the dragon. It decrees that the lords of the three realms will fly again. The rest of today's destiny has fallen upon your head. It weighs a bit more than a crown, does it not?
So once again, I think it's really interesting because before we had Vivacia saying that something lays in the air heavily, and it's just like something is going on at this moment in time.
Right.
And then Kennit's point of view when he learns about the baby is very similar to that sentiment of like, there are so many paths that lead out from this one. So many things can change. And I find it really interesting because I don't think we ever really have another character describe this moment except for B when B meets Beloved for the first time, where all of the possibilities open up around for other people. So I think it's really interesting to use that imagery specifically of standing here and knowing that the choices that he makes have a bunch of consequences no matter what he chooses.
And because it's Kennit, he feels like it's inevitable. He's like, oh, wow, this is so amazing. And then it instantly spirals to, oh, no, I can't fail anybody, so we have to lock them away. I have to leave Etta somewhere. I can't have a kid.
And it's inevitable that he would disappoint the child. Like, there's no way not to disappoint a child that you raise. So he can't have that. What does he do? And he just keeps, going down this spiral.
The charm speaks up there, and Kennit says, leave me alone, and then just is there in his memories. Other memories most deeply denied, flooded back to him, standing within the circle of his father's arms, reaching up to rest his own small hands on the inner spokes of Paragon's wheel while his father held the ship steady. He recalled riding tall on his father's shoulders, his mother laughing up at him, a bright scarf fluttering in her dark, dark hair as they strode through Divvytown. These recollections, bright and joyful, were more intolerable than any remembered pain. They were a mockery, a lie, for all fondness and safety had been erased one dark and bloody night. Now Etta would start it all over again. Was she mad? Didn't she know what must come? Eventually, of course, he'd have to hurt the child, not because he wanted to, but because it was inevitable. This moment marked one end of the pendulum's swing. Ride it they must, until it peaked at the other end, the place where he was Ygritte and Ygritte was he. Then the child must step up to play the role that had once been Kennit's. You poor, pathetic bastard, the charm whispered in horror. But pity would not stay destiny. Nothing could save him or the child. Events had to follow their pattern. Nothing could disrupt the cycling of time. Things would happen again just as they always had, just as they always would.
So I think this is maybe the saddest insight to Kennit that we get, in my opinion, at least.
Just his... the inevitability of his downfall.
Yeah. Well, not only that, but his belief in it.
Yeah.
Right? Like he has this opportunity and he sees it within his grasp of having a family and a child that loves him and depends on him that he can keep safe. And then that's taken away because he's reminded of what has happened to him and how I think there is a little bit of acceptance in there that there's nothing his father could have done to stop that, right?
Right. He didn't blame his father.
No, this isn't blaming. It's just that's inevitable. Something will happen that will make your child disappointed in you. And how do you live with that?
Yeah.
And it's not even that he wants to hurt his child. It's that he just has to. It's part of the way the world works. And he does not want to deal with that. And another detail I found really interesting is this weird shift of why would Etta do this? Why did she do this to me? Sort of thinking sprinkled in the middle there because it was Kennit's idea. He's the one who said that she needed to have a child. Obviously, he was thinking about having a child with Wintrow.
Yeah.
But it was his idea. He told her to have a child. And him not realizing that she would think that meant he wanted a child is different. It just, I don't know. I find it so interesting to have this sort of in the midst of this struggle of why wouldn't she know that things are going to turn awful? Why would she do this? It's also his own actions that led there and his own actions that are putting him on that pendulum path to become Ygritte. Right. And so I think it's all just really sad that that's what he's dealing with. And I think it really gets to the heart of what is wrong with Kennit, quote unquote. Obviously, trauma is not a fault of the victim, but I think Kennit's villainhood, like why he is that way, is perfectly encapsulated here.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
An indeterminate amount of time has passed when we're jolted out of his reverie by Jola asking, "Sir?" And everyone he's asked for is kind of gathered up behind him, and he's just been off in no man's land in his memories.
Well,
spiraling.
Not only that, but it's also raining now.
Yeah.
Which he didn't even realize.
He asks, "Where's the satrap?" He's like, "Behind you, sir." So he glances back, and Malta's back there with her head wrap in place now. The satrap is back there. Etta and Wintrow and Jola are all gathered. So he's kind of trying to angrily assert that, like, oh, of course, I was paying attention the whole time, and I know what was going on. So he is now issuing orders about the Jamaillian fleet. Like, return their hail, tell them that King Kennit bids them think well, remind them that I can recall the serpents at any time, blah, blah, blah. They would best treat with us, otherwise they risk getting destroyed. And Jola is very relieved. He's like, oh, so they haven't abandoned us. We can get the serpents back. And Kennit's just super angry at Jola. He's just like, you just don't
just
understand.
do your job.
Yeah. So Kennit is sitting there looking at the fleet approaching, And he sees that each ship belonged to a noble, and each cherished the hope of returning laden with booty and crowned with glory. They would vie to be the one to treat for the satrap's release. Every noble would want to negotiate it. So he's still hoping, like, this is a negotiation. They're going to pay me a bunch of money. I have all the cards here.
Right. And not only that, but there are so many nobles that he's hoping that each of them sends a person that he can then ransom.
Right.
They're all dumb enough to send their own selves over to be ransomed. And so he's sort of trying to just really put the baby news out of his mind. But I do want to say, I think Etta telling Kennit about the baby is sort of a turning point in the trajectory of this moment, right? I think all the choices Kennit continues to make from here on out are slightly influenced by the back of his mind, knowing that he has a child on the way.
Yeah, definitely. Because I don't think he would have been as supremely confident if he wasn't affected by this news. He would have been like, okay, get your weapons ready. Like,
right.
We don't know what they're going to expect.
And we'll talk about it, but later Malta talks about the concern she has about the nobles coming over. And I think part of the fact that he hasn't thought about that is, again, because he's reeling over this news.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know. It's so interesting how little things really are causing ripple effects.
We jump over to Althea's point of view, where she and Jack are with Rain in the room while he is trying to recover from being almost drowned. And Rain clapped both hands to his bared face, saying, "Did she see me?" "Yes, she did," Althea replied quietly. There was no point in lying or trying to save his feelings. "She's very young, Rain," Althea excused her niece. "You knew that when you began courting her. You can't expect... Leave me for a time, please." So obviously, Rain thinks it's because of he's hideous, and Althea thought so too.
Yeah. I mean, Althea can't think of another reason for her to run away like that.
Yeah, so
she's kind of shocked about it, but not like, no, of course that's not why she ran. Which is kind of crazy because she saw how affected Malta was by her change in appearance. You think she would think about that and be like, oh, that's why?
Yeah, but Aunt Althea isn't one for the subtle things.
That's true. That's true. Also, I do want to mention that before this whole, like, you can't expect Malta to, she's a young girl, you know. Rain does ask, where's Malta?
Didn't I find her?
Yeah, didn't I find her? And Althea lets him know, kind of an excuse of, well, King Kennit has summoned her and the satrap to him. So... yeah, so
there's a reason.
There's a reason for her not to be there, but it is sort of feeling like a flimsy excuse when you think about the fact that she ran away screaming after seeing his face.
Althea follows Jack out, and she's saying that there are Wintrow's clothes in the pegs if you want some dry things. And she thinks as she's looking back and exiting the room, despite his scaly face and eyes, that he was a well-made man, tall and muscled, so she doubts that any of Wintrow's things would fit him.
Right.
And Jack seemed to be following her thoughts. Even with the scales, he's not bad looking. "I should be out on the foredeck, not down here," Althea grumbles to her. "Why? It's not like you have any control over what happens up there." "Admit it, Althea. When you look at the scales in his face, you have to wonder about the rest of him." "No, I don't."
And Althea pretends like her iciness and not wanting to talk about Rain in that way is because she fully respects the Rain Wilders as her kin.
Yeah.
Because she's a Bingtown trader and she would never disrespect a Rain Wilder by speculating about what his body looked like.
She does say, like, they can't help what the Rain Wilds did to them. You know, she's seen Rain Wilders before and had not been shocked.
Right. You know. But I also just feel like this is probably not the best time in her life for her to be romanticizing men.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's a little bit callous of Jack to try to
tone deaf.
Yeah, just to be like, hey, despite what's happened to you, let's ogle this man. Or we could just leave it alone.
Although Althea does turn her mind to Rain in general, thinking that, you know, scaled or not, Rain is a good catch. That he had come seeking his betrothed so far in such a way was undeniable evidence of a brave heart. Still, she did not blame Malta for running away. She'd probably fantasized a handsome face beneath his veil. So Althea also thinks that his look had shaken her. And then we
Right.
jump over to Rain, who is fully wallowing in it now.
Right. He is now seeing himself in a mirror for the first time in a while.
And he's like, no wonder.
Yeah, he's a lot more heavily scaled than he was when he left on this journey. And Tintaglia was right. Their closeness to each other physically has accelerated some of the changes that he's seeing. And he talks about how there are 50-year-olds in the Rain Wilds who aren't nearly as heavily scaled as he is. So he can't imagine the monster he's going to become as he ages, because obviously it'll keep getting worse. So.
Which is fine, though, because obviously he's going to be spending his life alone now, but most of it's going to be underground searching for dragons that are buried. Because he's
Right.
going to fulfill his half of the promise.
Right.
So he's a bit of a downer about his life right now. He does mention that there was a bluish cast to his skin beneath, bruising or a color change as a question mark. Tintaglia is blue, so I don't remember if he actually changes from copper to blue. But
Right.
he might.
Yeah, I'm not really sure either.
Yeah.
But he is just sort of lamenting at the loss of the life he thought he'd have with Malta, despite the fact that he promised his life to the dragon to uncover different cities to look for other dragon eggs. He is still sort of, he was like thinking he would have this great reunion with Malta.
Yeah, but instead, like, he thought that he would save her. He would find her and save her, and she would say, I love you no matter
Yes.
what.
He dreamed that he would rescue her unscathed despite the horrible dangers she'd endured, and that she would collapse into his arms and promise to always be at his side. He dreamed that when he unveiled before her, she would smile and touch his face and tell him it did not matter, and that it was him she loved, not his face. But reality was crueler. Tintaglia had dropped him and departed with her precious serpents. After days of battering flight and sleeping in cold and isolated beaches, he'd nearly drowned. Malta's kin had come to rescue him. They must think him an utter fool. The entire quest had been to no purpose, for Malta was safe already. He had no idea why Vivacia was flying the Jamaillian flag, but obviously Althea Vestrit had managed to regain her ship and rescue her niece. They not only hadn't needed his pathetic efforts, they had to rescue him. And so I think that's really interesting to get an insight into how it looks from Rain's point of view.
Yeah.
What he thinks is going on.
And eventually he just puts on his veil first, even though it's sodden and wet.
He tries to put on Wintrow's shirt and realizes it's going to be too small. And then he looks at the veil and puts that on,
Mm-hmm.
But I did also want to touch on the fact that in his mind, Althea's in charge of the ship right now.
Yeah.
And that whatever happened, Althea came back and everything went fine. He also talked about hoping that Malta would be unscathed despite the dangers, and that he's just excited to see her again. And it's, I don't know, it's just so interesting. He and Malta both have such a vivid imagination.
Yeah, I know.
And really a romanticized version of events. And if I'm being honest, that's probably exactly what Malta would have done in a normal circumstance if she didn't have her head covering that she was so worried about.
True. Well, we jump over to Malta's point of view. Thinking about her chapped lips and her scrub maid's fingers and her huge scar on her forehead. And now she's lifting her face to the cold rain and welcoming its icy touch. Numb me, take away this pain.
They're both so dramatic.
Yeah.
Understandably, but still.
The satrap is complaining to Malta that he's cold and he's tired of standing there. And he says, I don't think they're coming. Why must I stand here in the wind and rain? Because it pleases me, Kennit snapped at him. Wintrow offers his cloak, and the satrap's like, but it's dripping wet. What good would that do me? So they're kind of sniping at each other, Kennit and the satrap, back and forth. And Malta is just taking a breath. He's just like, well, Kennit and satrap don't seem that much different to one another. If I can manage one, I can manage the other. Kennit's a dangerous, violent man, but I don't fear him anymore. What could he do to me? Ruin my life? Ha ha ha.
The thought almost made her smile.
So she goes over to Kennit and then begs Kennit basically, or asks him with political niceness at first to give the Lord Magnodon Satrap a cloak and a chair to sit on.
Right. Allow Malta to go fetch him a nice cloak and chair.
Kennit's like, that's foolish. He doesn't need anything like that. He takes no harm. And then Malta gives the reasoning of like, well, you know, if he's so valuable, you need to make him seem valuable to everyone else. So garb him in something nice looking.
Right. Yeah. And Malta does have a point, right? Like if you want other people to believe not only that this is a satrap, but that you believe the satrap has power to grant all the things that he's promised you, why would you treat him so poorly? Why would he be a prisoner? Then people are going to think that he signed the treaty under duress.
Right.
And so Malta has a really good point here. And that does seem to get through to Kennit.
And Etta seems approving as well.
Yeah. I think she recognizes game.
Yeah, right.
Game recognizes game or whatever.
Etta, see what you can manage for him. I wish him to be very visible. I can arrange that. And Malta meets her gaze and says, my gratitude to you, lady. And then she follows Etta.
She also notes that there is intelligence in Etta's gaze, which I thought was a really interesting thing for Malta to say about somebody who has questionable background.
Malta is very happy that she found her sea legs and that she can move around her father's ship with such ease. Oh man, it pains me to see Vivacia referred to as Kyle's ship.
I know, but it like that sentence really jolted me out of reading. I was like, oh yeah, Malta does believe that this is rightfully Kyle's ship and probably thinks it should stay that way. So it's such an interesting thing to add in there to remind us that she doesn't think this is Althea's ship.
Yeah. So she sets thoughts of her father aside because she can't think of him right now, and resolutely she does the same with Rain. Eventually, she must stand before him, ruined and scarred, and face the disappointment in those extraordinary copper eyes. But I will say, right before that sentence, there's a very curious statement here. It's almost a throwaway. Nor would she dwell on Rain so close that she could feel his presence. That could just be, a turn of phrase, or it could be a connection with Elderlings through the dragon.
So I'll touch on it later too, because I agree with that. But there is a moment when, it might not be this chapter, actually.
Might be the
I'm not
next
sure.
one.
Yeah, but whenever Rain and Malta do ultimately meet face to face and then are later together, it does seem like Rain is reading her really easily.
Yeah.
And, like picking up on her emotions and her thoughts in a way that he's playing off as being like, oh, I just know her so well because we're meant to be, but has the sort of undercurrent of there is some magic going on.
Yeah. So Malta is trying to clear her thoughts of those things and just focus on the now as she follows Etta to the main cabin to find a nice chair and a nice cloak for the satrap.
And the cloak that Etta chooses is this big red fur-lined cape that is
very colorful,
a little gaudy. And she talks about how Kennit won't wear it because it's too gaudy.
Yeah.
But she thinks Kennit would look really nice in it, which Malta replies with, undoubtedly. She agreed without expression. Personally, she felt it little mattered how a rapist dressed once he knew what he was. Etta stood, the rich fabric draped over her arm. The hood is lined with fur, she pointed out. Abruptly, she asked, what are you thinking? There is no point in flinging harsh words at this woman. Wintrow had said that Etta knew what Kennit was. Somehow, she'd come to terms with it. Who was she to criticize Etta's loyalty? She must find Malta as craven for serving the satrap. I was wondering if Kennit had thought this through. I believe an alliance of the Jamaillian nobles sought to have the satrap die in Bingtown so they could blame the traitors for his murder and plunder our town. Are those nobles in this fleet of the ship loyal to the satrap and intent on his rescue? Or are they the traitors hoping to finish what was begun in Bingtown? So...
yeah, she continues and says, might as well blame the Pirate Isles as well as Bingtown.
The good excuse as any. I think this whole interaction between Malta and Etta is really interesting because they are sort of similar characters in a way. They're both really strong women who use their knowledge to their benefit. They know how to influence people and are not afraid of using their womanly ways to convince men to do their bidding.
Yeah.
They both just see it as a tool that they're able to use and will. And I think this interaction especially is interesting because it starts with Malta sort of at first wanting to snub Etta because she's staying with Kennit despite what he's done to Althea, but then realizing she doesn't look much better because she's behind the satrap and he's clearly not that great of a guy.
Right.
So who is she to judge? Maybe Etta has different thoughts behind it. And so, yeah, then she is honest with her and says, hey, Kennit might be making a mistake.
Etta doesn't take kindly to that, to some random woman questioning Kennit, though. And Etta's like, yeah, I'm sure Kennit's considered everything. He is not a man like other men. He sees far, and in times of great danger, he manifests great powers. I know you must doubt me, but all you need to do is ask your brother. So then she kind of lists the things like, oh, he's calmed a storm on command. He's charmed the serpents. He healed your brother and got rid of his tattoo, all that kind of thing. Perhaps a man like that does not have to abide by ordinary rules, she went on. Perhaps his own vision prompts him to do things forbidden to other men. Malta cocked her head at the pirate's woman. Are we still talking about negotiating to restore the satrap to the throne? Or do you seek to excuse what he did to my father? And my aunt, she added silently to herself. Your father's behavior needs more excuses than Kennit's, Etta returned coldly. Ask Wintra what it's like to wear slave chains and a tattoo. Your father got what he deserved. Perhaps we all get what we deserve, Malta returned sharply. Her eyes swept up and down Etta, and she saw the woman flush with anger. She experienced a moment's remorse when she glimpsed sudden unmasked pain in Etta's eyes. Perhaps we do. Bring that chair. It was a petty revenge, but Malta stuck lugging the heavy chair.
Yes. So it's really interesting because obviously Etta knows that Malta knows, and there is this sort of veiled talk, right?
Yeah, just trying to excuse because, like, oh, he's a great man. And he's doing great things.
He's a powerful, almighty, all-knowing man. He's not a regular man. And I think that's really interesting because I think that is something that is used as an excuse for a lot of people who abuse others, right?
Mm-hmm.
That they're these great pillars of people and that maybe they did this one wrong thing of abusing somebody, but when you look at everything else about them,
they have such a bright future ahead of them.
Yeah, and let's focus on the bright future, and we wouldn't want to cut that short. That's not fair to that poor abuser. So I think it's really interesting to have that here, to have that be the thing that Etta is holding on to get her through this.
Right.
And I mean, obviously, Etta's in a different position, right? She is carrying Kennit's baby, and that's got to be a lot to go through when you realize the type of person that the father of the child is going to be. Like, I think it's just a hard place to be in, and it's really easy to say, sure, the action was bad, but the person on the whole is so good. Especially when it's somebody that you're so close with, the way Etta feels close to Kennit.
Yeah.
So really unfortunate, but that is her, I guess, excuse. And I think
needs to convince herself of something.
Yeah. And I think it's pretty big of Malta to say, you know, like, is that what you tell yourself to feel better? And maybe everybody gets what they deserve in the end. And she kind of doesn't back down from it. She doesn't, I guess, you know, make a bigger deal of it, but she doesn't also just sort of go, oh, okay, then.
Yeah.
She's like, all right, if that's what makes you feel better, but I also know that's a bunch of baloney. So
we jump over to Rain's point of view, who is just focused on watching Malta being very sad about himself and watching her interact with the satrap. There's a bunch of phrases in here like she smiled at the satrap, her tender concern showed on her face, there was fondness in her every touch, because she's wrapping the satrap in the cloak, having him sit down, tucking the cloak around his legs, and
Fussing over him like he's a child.
yeah. And Rain is sitting there thinking like, well, yeah, I guess the satrap is, with his pale patrician countenance and lordly ways, far more fitting of a match for Malta Vestrit. So he's thinking about the past, like, oh yeah, he had the first dance at a presentation ball. Was her heart turning then? The trials they had endured together would undoubtedly have bonded them. What man could resist Malta's charm and beauty? No doubt the satrap felt great gratitude as well. He could not have survived on his own. And that paragraph is so funny to me because they absolutely despise one another.
Yes. And also, the satrap would never be grateful to anyone for helping him survive. He
At least not
believes
vocally.
no, because he believes that's their duty, because he's the jewel of Jamaillia.
But Rain is right that they have bonded. You know,
Yeah.
even Malta does feel some kind of, not, friendship or anything, but some kind of ownership over him.
Yeah, it does kind of feel like
And the
a
satrap,
pet owner.
yeah, and the satrap does cry out to her to help him.
Yeah.
There is some reliance on both of their ends there, but Rain is just feeling heartbroken and watching Malta now, watching her closely.
I also find it so interesting because there's so much emphasis on this part of how smitten Malta seems and how she's so caring and she is so convincing to Rain, because later, I think it's next chapter, he sees her interact with the satrap again, or maybe it's 2 chapters from now, but either way, he sees her interact with the satrap and is like, oh, it's so fake. How can the satrap not know how fake it is? And that's really funny to me because we have this chapter specifically talking about how it's so real and he thinks that she's in love with him, and how could they not be in love with each other?
Well, he's trying to find up another excuse rather than just his face, right? And how ugly his scaling is. And another example of why he believes this is that he ends this section with she didn't even come up to me with a word of greeting as a friend even. Did she fear that Rain would hold her to her promise? Did she fear he would humiliate her before the satrap? She would never again be his. Then we jump over to Althea, who's viewing the same scene.
Right. But I do want to say it's odd to me that Rain is saying that she didn't come greet him even as a friend, because when was she supposed to greet him? As far as I'm aware of the timeline, by the time he is conscious in the bunk, she has already been called by Kennit to help, and then she goes to get stuff for Satrap, but she's not free. She doesn't have free time. She's playing this role, right? So it just seems odd that he's like, hasn't.
I disagree. I disagree with that because Malta does not want to be in his presence. So she would have found excuses to leave. She could have found excuses to stay too for a little bit until he was awake.
Right. I guess you're right, but it just feels like a weird, she didn't even greet me as a friend, but he's hiding watching her at this moment. It's not like they have come across each other since that moment and she has ignored him to his face. Yes, she's avoiding him, we know that, but his whole thing about she hasn't even said hello, I just when would she have said hello? You know what I mean? It's I don't know.
Yeah, as I mentioned, Althea is watching the same scene. It's really funny comparing the two, because she sees Malta treating the satrap as if he were a child, as if he were Selden, and she had to wrap him up in a blanket because he was pitiful. She pulled the hood well up as if the man were Selden. When he had seated himself in his makeshift throne, she even tucked the cloak more snugly about his feet and legs. So it pains Althea to see Malta acting kind of like a servant and humbling herself and treating this man as a child, because he basically is a child.
Right.
And it's just such a funny comparison to Rain's view of it. It's just oh, Malta's treating him so tenderly. They're obviously in love.
And then Althea knows the truth of it and is like, man, it's awful that she has to do that to survive.
Yeah.
But more so, she's frustrated because Kennit is watching the whole scene with a smug little smile. And that makes red hot anger dance in her vision.
Mm-hmm.
So much so she needs to calm herself down and take some breaths, and she grabs onto the wizardwood railing.
Yeah. You want to kill him that badly, the ship observed quietly. The comment seemed intended for her alone, yet Althea saw Kennit turn slightly to the words. He raised one eyebrow in a slight mocking query. Yes, I do. She let him read the words on her lips. So, the reminder that hasn't cooled down at all.
No. And then we immediately switch over to Kenneth's point of view, where he lets himself have a small, sad shake of his head before he turns his attention.
Got to keep up his pretense and his story.
Exactly.
There's a small ship that was drawing steadily closer to them. It was coming sluggishly through the darkening afternoon, and he's wondering if it had taken damage in the serpent attack. And sailors stood ready on deck to assist their betters to cross to Vivacia. Smile crooked his lips. It would be amusing if it began to sink while it was alongside. Perhaps I should have dressed for the occasion, he observed aloud to Etta, just as well that we have decked our satrap so royally. Maybe clothing is all they can recognize. So again, he's just grinning expectantly. He's focused on what good things these ships will bring. And he's like, oh, all of these people out on decks on the other ships, they're going to help their people over to ours.
Yeah, it just like really puts to mind the fact that he is super distracted right now.
Yeah. That is not the way that Kennit thinks. Kennit is paranoid to a fault.
Yeah.
And in this scene, he's just like, I'm assured.
It's so odd. It's just really out of character for him to not already.
It's almost slight. It's not super out of character because we've seen some instances where he's like, I'll trust to my luck and I just am supremely confident in this. But this is such a precarious situation that it does seem out of place.
Yeah. I mean, I guess out of character in a normal way, not like, how could Robin Hobb write this? This is clearly a mistake. More like he is acting out of character because of the news of the baby. Like that's clearly influencing him in a way that's like making him act out of character. So it makes sense in the context of the story, but I do think he is acting out of character.
We jump over to Malta's point of view then, who is also observing the approaching ships and asking the satrap if he recognizes anything on board. And he's like, do you recognize any of them? Do you think they're loyal to you? And the satrap's like, well, I know that's old Lord Krieth's colors. He was most enthusiastic about my journey north, yet declined to join me because sea travel pains his joints. Yet look how easily he crosses to our deck, and how tall he stands. And there, he keeps pointing out some others. Obviously, none of them are friends to him.
Right.
And Malta suspected it an instant before anyone else did.
To be clear, all of the people he's describing are kind of off. There's something off about the description, right? So with Lord Krieth, he's standing tall, even though he like complained of joint pains or whatever. And then he barely needed the guy helping him across. Then there's also Lord Ferdio, but he's a small, slight man. This must be a stouter, taller son of his. The others, I cannot tell, but they're so well hooded and hatted, their collars pulled up so high I can scarce see their faces. So that's what Malta's realizing. Yeah, they're not who they're pretending to be. Something is off. And so when she screams, "Where treachery?" it sort of spurs everything into action. So
yeah, the men kind of break out of their disguises, maybe a little bit too early.
Yeah, so not everybody is on board yet, but everybody is starting to move. And of course, she mentions Kennit's pirates are always on standby for treachery.
Yeah.
So they react just as quickly and they have their swords at the ready and are getting ready to fight. Whereas Etta and Wintrow are sort of forming a triangle with Kennit.
Yeah.
And even her scrawny brother has gotten out a weapon along with Etta and Kennit. So he's going to fight clearly.
Jack and Althea, empty-handed, had moved to back him, meaning Wintrow. And all this in the merest blinking of an eye. So obviously fighting breaks out. The satrap is like horrified. He's like, protect me, and grabs onto Malta and won't let go of her. He just has her by the wrist and is like, protect me, bring me below, protect me.
They've come to kill me. I know they have.
Yep. And that's pretty much it. She's just like, let me go. I need to see what's going on. And there's more men that were pouring from the other vessel onto their deck.
Right. And this is such a scary moment because all of this is sort of happening around Malta. She's not really getting involved per se, and she is kind of freaking out, rightly so. I would also be so terrified.
Yeah.
She's freaking out because she doesn't really know what to do, and the satrap is gripping her so tightly. So now she's stuck with the satrap, who all these people are after,
Mm-hmm.
and she doesn't know what to do, and he won't let go. And then on top of that, Jack comes by and smashes the chair that
To get some weapons, some
the
clubs.
satrap has just been sitting on, and she's like, this lady's crazy. But Jack hands her one of the legs of the chair along with Althea so that they all have weapons, and tells her to go.
Mm-hmm. Malta threw her head back and stared wildly around her. The other ships of the Jamaillian fleet were drawing near. She caught a glimpse of the Marietta charging down on them. She could not see the motley, but she doubted it had fled. She glimpsed another ship, coming swiftly, not flying Jamaillian colors. Another pirate ship chanced upon the fray. Then she saw the figurehead move. A live ship comes! A Bingtown ship comes to our aid! But no one is paying her any heed. Satrap is still saying, like, get me below, protect me. And she's just saying, let me go. I can't protect you if you cling like this. And then we switch back over to the Paragon's deck.
Yes, because that is a live ship that is coming.
Exactly. So we're with Brashen right now, and Amber's like, well, we have no idea what we're charging into, but Brashen has seen the Vivacia. He knows fighting broke out there and nothing's going to stop him from rescuing Althea at this point because they're so close and he can't have her come to any harm. So Samoy break out the weapons. Samoy's like, who are we fighting? He's like, anyone who gets in between us and Althea. And then Paragon's like, but save Kennit for me.
Right. But this is especially scary to Brashen because he mentions to Amber that all of these Jamaillian people are different than the pirates, and he does not want to risk her being taken and given a slave tattoo or
Right.
worse, killed in whatever this fight is.
Mhm.
So whatever is happening, she's going to get hurt, and he does not care the danger to himself or his crew.
And then we switch back over to Malta in the middle of this fight. Chaos is raining on deck here, and she sees that Jack is pulled down, and Althea dives into the melee after her. As she vanished, a wave of Jamaillian warriors came up over the lip of the deck. She had one glimpse of Wintro, Etta, and Kennit, all in a tight group, fighting for their lives. Here he is, roared a Jamaillian sailor as he leapt up to her. So she is swinging her club. It's very ineffective because she doesn't have a lot of strength behind it. He's roaring with laughter and pushing her aside. He's grabbing the satrap. And when she tries to snatch the satrap back, the fighter held him out of her reach and drew his sword back to plunge it into Malta, then stared in sudden disbelief at a sword tip standing out from his chest. Behind him, a tall man roared his fury. He jerked both sword and victim back and away from Malta. Get down, be small, Rain shouted at her furiously. Then he turned his back to her. She had a glimpse of his left sleeve sodden with blood. And 3 men flung themselves at him, and he went down before her very eyes. Before she can help him, though, another sailor comes up and says, hey, I got him. I got the satrap, and kind of captures the satrap out from her. And she's tousled around and kicked inadvertently, but
Right.
dazed. And she just sees the satrap being run off.
Right. Well, she notes that the person who kicked her clearly didn't mean to because all they care about is getting the satrap.
Yeah.
So she's not even a thought anymore, but she is still, reeling. Obviously, this is really scary. There's a lot of things happening in this moment, and she has to deal with the fact that Rain briefly came by and saved her and then turned around to be mauled by random people. So it's not looking great, and there's a lot of things happening that she has to pay attention to, right? Because what do you do in this situation? The love of your life just got hounded by 3 men.
Yeah.
And then also the satrap, who is the key to your survival, somebody that you've been watching over for however long, has now been taken. He's probably going to die.
Yeah.
And she talks about that struggle,
Yeah, the sailor's carrying off the satrap, and the battle parts before him and then recedes with him, and all the boarders are kind of leaving because they got what they came for.
The satrap was an annoying, useless person, but she had cared for him like a child, Day and night she had been at his side. It smote her heart to see him being borne off to his death. Malta, he cried, and his one free hand strained towards her. The satrap, she shouted uselessly. They have taken him. Save him. Save him. No one could answer her cry for help as his captors bore him off. And the other Jamaillian warriors fell back around him, grinning and shouting with triumph as the focus of the battle shifted. Malta caught a glimpse of Althea. She had taken a blade from someone. She made an abortive attempt to break free of the knot of fighters to engage her, but Jack dragged her back. He's not worth your life, the tall woman shouted at her. And then, from a triangle of bodies around the deck, Rain reared up. Malta shrieked aloud with joy at the sight of him. When he had gone down, she'd given up hope for him dead, thinking him dead. Rain, she cried, and he snatched up the blade and staggered after the satrap's captors. She screamed, No, come back, don't, Rain. But he didn't get far because a wounded man clutched at him and he dashed past, and Rain fell solidly to the deck. Heedless of all else, Malta flung herself towards the struggling men.
Yeah, so Althea is like, okay, I'll help out Malta, try to save the satrap. And then Rain's like, Malta really likes the satrap and wants someone to save her. I'll do it.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting that Jack holds back Althea in this moment and tells her he's not worth her life. And then
Jack
also
has that mercenary, thought. She's not technically a soldier, I don't think. She's just a sailor. But yeah, just kind of like, it's not our fight.
Yeah.
Not our fight, babe.
Yeah, let's stick out of this one. But I did find it interesting that Malta did sort of go after the satrap first.
Yeah.
Like take care of that issue first. But then whenever Rain pops back up and goes after the satrap, it doesn't matter anymore. She just cares about what's happening to Rain.
Yeah. Well, because she thinks Rain was dead initially. So yeah, kind of, okay, the next thing. Can't be Rain. Althea's taking care of herself with Jack. Satrap's the only one who needs help. Jumps on that.
Right. And then we go over to Althea, who is being held back by Jack, and she's saying, let me go.
Yeah. And then Jack's like, no, let him go. They've taken him onto their deck. Will you take the fight there where the odds are even worse? We've lost him, Althea, at least for now. Althea knows she's right. The Jamaillian sailors are kind of going back to their own ships right now. And they have the satrap.
And they're cutting all the lines between the ships so that nobody can follow. She
sees Rain's curtailed charge, and an unlikely savior springs to the satrap's rescue. With a wild cry of fury, Kennit sprang from between Etta and Wintro and into the fray. Don't let them take him, he roared angrily. He had a short blade in one hand and his crutch gripped in his other arm. She did not expect him to get more than a few steps, but he swung his way across the deck, loping from foot to crutch with a grace that amazed her. To me, Kennit roared as he ran. Loyal pirates closed in behind him. Etta and Wintro sprang after him, but others had filled the gap. They were cut off from him. And then she witnesses his miraculous leap like a tiger from one deck to the other and lands. And some of the other sailors make it too, but at least one missed because it's too far and the boat is pulling away at this point.
Right.
She can't see what becomes of Kennit afterwards. They're kind of all surrounded and outnumbered on that deck.
Too many men converged on the outnumbered pirate king and his men. Etta screamed and raged and gathered herself. Wintro tackled her to keep her from flinging herself after Kennit because the gap widens too far.
Mm-hmm. Etta turns on Wintro and says, "You fool, we cannot let them have him. They'll kill him. You know that. I don't intend to let them keep him, but your drowning just now would not save him. Jola, they've taken Kennit. Vivacia, after them. They've taken Kennit. We must pursue." Vivacia took up the cry. "Up anchor, put on sail. We must go after them. They've taken Kennit."
And Althea sort of has a moment here where she says, "No, let them have him."
Yeah, just let it be.
Yeah, let us
be rid of him.
Yeah, let this be the end. And that's not what's going to happen. And she knows that it was sort of a silly hope because all around her people are getting to their feet and sort of working towards going after Kennit.
The ship loved him and she would have him back no matter the cost. And Althea is thinking that in the end her ship would be in Jamaillian hands and it was a lost cause already, but she knew that the ship would pursue it. She would be borne along with her to face a savage end. And then all of a sudden, a voice from the grave says, "Hello, the Vivacia. Who has taken Kennit?" Paragon's voice rings out. She looks at him, and it's not Paragon. He bore the Paragon's nameplate, but the figurehead was an open countenanced young man, beardless, with his hair bound back in a warrior's tail. Then she had a glimpse of a golden woman standing on the deck just back of the figurehead, waving both her arms in a wild greeting. She could not see Brashen. There was no way to be sure he was alive too, but she suddenly felt he must be. Paragon's eyes were closed and he sailed with his hands stretched blindly before him. So Althea ends up thinking like, oh, we must have been wrong. He's still blind.
Right.
Unfortunate.
Even the carving doesn't help.
Yeah. And the white serpent is still there, cutting before the bow of Paragon.
Yes. And Jack is suddenly beside her saying they survived.
Yeah.
They're alive.
Jack twirls her around and Althea says, "It's unnerving yet wonderful to be snatched off her feet and whirled around by the larger woman." So Vivacia is crying out in despair to Paragon, like, that ship, he's on board her. They'll kill him, Paragon. They'll kill him. She's pointing frantically and uselessly to the ship because Paragon can't see. He has his eyes closed.
But somehow Paragon does go after.
Yeah. And her cry diverts Marietta and Motley as well. Instead of going to Vivacia, they turn and chase the other ship.
Yes.
Paragon was already underway, though, and the will of a live ship propelled him as much as the wind in his sails. He gathered speed unnaturally. Even the crew of the Vivacia, familiar with the ways of live ships, cried out in wonder as he swept past. Althea had a glimpse of Brashen running down Paragon's decks with Clef at his heels. At the sight of him, her heart sprang to life in her chest. Then Paragon had swept past by them, showing Vivacia his stern. She stood staring, stunned with joy. So now everyone around them is scrambling to chase after this Jamaillian ship. Althea is looking around and she sees that Malta, unharmed but obviously shaken, wandered stricken through the tangled dead. Wintro had taken command away from the rattled Jola, and Etta seemed to be everywhere, lending a hand and shouting for speed at every task. Jack is shouting at Althea to break her trance, saying like, "Get moving, let's go." Althea joins her shouts to Wintro's. After him, Paragon must not face them alone. So they get going and get ready to chase.
Yeah, so that's the end of the chapter, is sort of Althea in this daze of realizing that not only is Paragon not at the bottom of the ocean, but her friends are safe as well, including Clef, Amber, and Brashen.
Yeah, definitely. It's, man, it's such a fun chapter. So much happens.
Yeah, it is a lot. It's really interesting, the points of views that we get as well, I think, because I mean, we get the point of view from Malta, who is not a fighter, who has never really been in a fight like this, who is sort of just trying to survive, who has a split interest of helping the satrap because he's like a child to her that she's helped take care of, and then also making sure that this man that she loves is okay and survives this after coming so far.
Right.
And so I think that's an interesting person to be looking at the fight from, rather than from the point of view of somebody who knows a fight and would know how hopeless it is.
Mm-hmm.
And then also we get to see a lot of the, like, Althea just noticing things, I don't know, like having to deal with the fact that she doesn't care that Kennit has been taken away, and such
mixed feelings.
Yeah.
You know, like, again, another betrayal. Even she got her hopes up a little bit that Vivacia would let him go, but now knows that she never will.
Yeah. So there's that. And then also like the betrayal of the fact that, you know, Vivacia, like you said, cares so much about Kennit, but also is listening to Wintro over her. I mean, I guess she's not trying to control what's going on, but like they are starting to have some sort of a bond come up. And then there's also the news that Paragon is alive, and so is the man that she loves. And so
just a cacophony of differing thoughts that are popping into every character's head.
Yeah, there's just so much going on for everyone involved.
Mm-hmm.
And it really is this like precipice moment of a lot of things, because I mean, how terrible to get that close to somebody you love and then have to be in a battle where either of you could die at any point now,
Right.
after
Right.
spending so long thinking the other person was dead anyway, and
Yeah.
now having that joy of like they're alive and they're dead.
Yeah.
And so that's a lot too. So
Yeah,
yeah.
man. Yeah, crazy chapter. It continues for another chapter here. And then the latter half of the book, just kind of wrapping things up.
Yeah.
So thank you for joining us for this one. If you have any thoughts about this chapter or, the multitude of things going on, please let us know. You can find us at isfitshappy@gmail.com, or you can message us on any of our social medias, Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads, YouTube, Reddit. We're on isfitshappy on all of those. Let us know what you got going on.
All right, now we're going to talk about some things that you guys have brought to our attention, the best portion of the episode. And we're going to start with an email from Anna. So Anna has emailed to talk about their disappointment with Wintro and how he reacts to Althea and what has happened to her by Kennit.
And Wintrow's reaction long term kind of refers to it as Wintrow's betrayal.
Right. So Anna writes, I can extend the benefit of doubt to Wintro until Etta tells him Althea was raped. After that moment, I am so disappointed in him. I thought he was better than this. Mm-hmm. And the reasoning, I'll paraphrase from there, is because he believes Althea. He believes that it's happened because Etta has told him, but he doesn't do anything about that belief. He doesn't stand up to Kennit. He doesn't push back. And that's so different from what we know about Wintro.
Right.
Wintro throughout the books is really a person who stands on his principles and has gone against Etta, his father, and even Kennit himself for doing things that are against his principles. He has not ever been afraid to stand up and argue with anybody for making decisions he doesn't personally agree with and saying to their face, I don't agree with what you're doing. Mm-hmm. And then in this moment, all of a sudden, it's okay to just sort of sweep it under the rug and
he could have talked to anybody. Like we've talked about before, like he could have talked to Althea in private when they had that conversation. Anna mentions that he could have talked to Vivacia or Bolt about it.
Yes.
And nothing happens.
Right.
Anna says he doesn't have a lot of power, but he does have some.
Yeah, and even mentioning that it would be better if obviously the situation he's in is really precarious and his safety is at risk.
He's 15 years old as well, you know.
So it's a lot of pressure to put on him, but especially because up until this point, he hasn't had a problem putting his life on the line to talk about his morals or to stand up against what he thinks is wrong. It's just extra jarring. Mm-hmm. And especially because he doesn't ever go to Althea and say, I believe you, let's work on a way to, like, what do we do about that? What's the best way to go about acting on that knowledge without my life being in danger?
Yeah.
If that was really the case, but he doesn't even do that. I mean, he does eventually tell Althea he believes her, but he doesn't stand up against this. And not only does he not stand up in the moment or in the next few weeks while his aunt is there, but then after Kennit dies, he spends the rest of his life upholding Kennit's legacy and making sure people still see Kennit as this wonderful dude. And, you know, like he's like trying to live in the footsteps of Kennit.
Yeah. So this is Anna's kind of long-term discussion about it. And I agree with it. Although at that point, looking at it from an outside point of view as a fictional world, I would value a whole nation of people more than I would value one person's mental health. You know, if Kennit is now seen as like just a dirty pirate and not like a founder of a kingdom, then all the people in the Pirate Isles might suffer. So I can see Wintro being like, this is for the good. Like he needs to be seen as a founder, as a leader, because he did found everything. I guess I can see it like that.
I
But yeah, it's obvious that Wintrow is still eaten up about it, even in later books. I think that he's
I
just
don't
like,
I don't know because I mean I've read ahead, so a little bit spoiler surprise. But in a few chapters, whenever he takes over the ship and is doing things, he keeps thinking, what would Kennit do? How would I do this if I
yeah,
was Kennit? And he's like still trying to live up to Kennit
yeah,
as a captain. And like, I feel like there is still so much admiration and he
sure,
does still want to be like Kennit in a lot of ways, which is really disappointing because he knows who Kennit is,
yeah,
right? And so I think the disappointment, like, sure, you can't go around and destroy this fresh kingdom by saying, oh, he's a dirty pirate. He was actually awful. But you don't have to make him out to be a hero and continuously uplift his name and honor him. You know, you can say, okay, he started this, but we're going to change it or whatever. Like, try to diminish his, I don't know,
yeah.
uh,
I mean, that's fair.
his
It's
legacy.
also a very 2025 or like at least 2000s way of looking at things too. Um, because like think of the conversation around like Thomas Jefferson or Andrew Jackson, one of the founding fathers of the US.
Sure.
They were pretty awful people too.
No, yeah, obviously.
But they are still upheld, and it's only kind of recently that conversation about how awful they were is kind of coming into play. And that's with media like Hamilton coming out that talks about and kind of says that they were noble people all looking for the same kind of thing. They just were misunderstood on the finer details of that.
Hmm.
Like there's still things about them that is coming out that it looks on those people as in a favorable light. And that's kind of how I view this. Like people could talk about how Kennit is awful, but he's going to be glorified for a while. And the people who were surrounding those founding fathers were probably looking up to them as like, wow, these are the greatest people of our nation.
Sure.
Now, it's not a direct allegory or comparison because, slavery back then was accepted and a lot of people were part of that, like with Thomas Jefferson.
Right.
And what Kennett did has never been accepted or should be tolerated.
Right.
So it's not perfect, but that's kind of like how I view the scenario ish. I don't know. Wintrow, the way Wintrow is set up at the beginning of this trilogy is like he should be a paragon of virtue, right?
Right.
But this is a Robin Hobb book. Like you're not going to be fulfilled on that. We're also set up with Althea will be the super independent captain at the end of everything, right? That's kind of like what she wants to do. That's not what happens. We're set up with Fitz as like somebody who can save the whole world and is a young assassin. And we don't really get much assassinations. And he ends up a broken, basically old man. I think it's just kind of subverting what the original promise and hope that a lot of these characters have.
Sure.
And yet it's heartbreaking for Wintrow to kind of turn that way. But I do understand why he does it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's not understandable in a way, but I agree with Anna that it does feel like a betrayal,
Yeah.
especially because his character leading up into this moment has had no problem stepping forward and saying what he believes is right or wrong. And then in this moment, this is the thing that he draws the line at. This
Yeah.
is where he's going to
That's fair.
not have a backbone about his convictions and his morals. It
Mhm.
just, it's really frustrating, I guess. And I feel like it also, as a counterpoint to my own frustration, it's clear that he doesn't know what to do because while he knew Kennit was bad, he had sort of accepted Kennit as being amazing. And he does later in the conversation with Althea think to himself about how I actually think he says it out loud that it's hard because he's sort of put his name in with Kennit and he's accepted all the good despite the bad.
Yeah.
But if he acknowledges the bad, then he has to acknowledge that he's been party to that too.
Right. That was in our last chapter episode too.
Yes.
Yeah.
So obviously that is a big thing that you have to grapple with of
Yeah.
I've been basically saying that all the bad is okay because I believe in what he's doing. And now I have to grapple with, if this bad is too bad, then do I need to relook at all the other bads he's done?
Mm-hmm.
Like, where's the line? What do I do? I've already like publicly said that I stand with this guy. Like, it is a lot, and he is young, but I think
Yeah.
it is really frustrating, and it does feel like a betrayal from Wintrow. And I said, whenever we went through the chapter where Althea accuses Kennit of what has happened to her, I am overly harsh on Wintrow a little bit in that chapter, and I'm really frustrated with how he acts and reacts and his choices going on. I don't know. Like, I get it on the one hand, but on the other hand, just do better.
I mean, yeah, it is heartbreaking for that kind of interaction to happen. Definitely. Like 100%. As you were talking there, I was kind of thinking back to the beginning of Ship of Magic, where Wintrow is talking about the contradictions of Saw and how he's kind of living one right now, or at least like
Yeah.
trying to puzzle through his own life of like, I can't accept one without the other.
Yeah.
Does this make me a good person or a bad person kind of thing?
Yeah. Touche.
At the beginning of Ship of Magic, Barandal is stuck on the 33rd contradiction, which is a priest should not presume to judge unless he can judge as Saw does, with absolute justice and absolute mercy. Which, like, that's kind of what Wintrow is he's trying to judge Kennit here, in my eyes. He's trying to judge whether his following of Kennit is righteous, if it's justified, if everything's good. I don't know. It just kind of reminded me of those moments where they're kind of discussing it with Barandal.
Sure.
You don't see it?
I don't know. I don't.
Well, thank you, Anna, very much for the conversation. Wintrow is a very complex character and does a lot of characters at the end of this trilogy do take kind of a bad turn.
Yeah. Thank you, Anna. We also got another email from a new listener, and they go by the name Corey.
Yeah, and Corey has a few conversations, a few topics to talk about here. And they just got finished listening to episode 236 about chapter 30 and has some conversations some questions about the recarving of Paragon.
Some thoughts on the recarving.
Yeah. Corey says, first, I don't think there's any reason that Amber couldn't be using the skill to shape Paragon, which is a concern Luke brought up. He mentioned the large amount of silver needed to transform a ship into a dragon, or the way silver would seep into an object when an Elderling was imbuing it with magic. The reason I don't think this is a problem is that, as I understand it, wizard wood is already imbued with silver from the sand used to create the cocoons. I think this is the same principle in the memory stones used to carve the dragons. From what I recall, although Verity used silver on his hands to help him carve the dragons, I don't think he was ever described as sinking into the stone the way it sinks into the plain wood at Kelsingra. Additionally, I don't think anyone who helped carve a dragon actually needed silver on their fingers to successfully carve the stone. And that's the first kind of topic that Corey brings up, and that's true. I do believe that Amber is using the skill to smooth away things on the grain. Like, it's discussed and described that there are rough parts in the wood, and it seems that she passes a finger over it and it smooths away those burrs.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, she's definitely doing that. But I think our discussion was about imbuing like a directive into the wood.
Right. Yeah. So I was talking about how I thought that maybe after this we see Paragon being more whole as a character and just having more confidence in who he is, and how I thought that maybe when Amber is using her skill hands to create Paragon's new face and body, she is putting in some sort of, whether that's on purpose or on accident, a sort of like skill touch that's allowing him to be more whole and more sure of himself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I had brought up the concerns that didn't think it was like the physical skill doing that, but I could definitely see that it's probably the connection from the silver on her fingertips that allows that to possibly happen,
Right.
but it's not actually seeping in. It's just the silver allows the connection.
Right. But also, I mean, I don't know that the silver seeps in to the dragons when Verity has it covered in his hand. I think it seeps into him,
Yeah.
and because he's using skill.
But also, I disagree with Corey here about needing silver to carve the dragons, because we have Verity covered his hands in silver, was carving the dragons. He brought Kettle to cover her hands in silver to help him carve the dragons. The fool has silvered fingertips when he was helping carve Girl on a dragon. And then when they swapped bodies, Fitz had Verity's arms of skill, and that's when he put his memories into Girl on a Dragon. Now, the people who are carving in as Levjal with the Pale Woman's Touch, yeah, that they don't have silver on their hands, but they also need hordes of people unwillingly thrown into the dragon somehow. I don't know. That's kind of an abomination, but
Yeah. So I just wanted to say, I don't think it's a silver doing anything. The silver is an amplification of the power that's already there in my mind. So, like, it's not needed. And yes, you're right that all those things have happened in that way. But in my mind, it's just an amplification, not a tool. Like, Verity should not be able to put enough of himself into the dragon to create a dragon. Like, he doesn't have enough lived experience. He doesn't have enough things that have happened to him to do this on his own. And he ultimately couldn't have done it on his own. He had to have Kestrel there, who lived for a couple hundred years, also help. But she also needed help to amplify what they were doing with that silver touch. And I think Fool is a weird case because I don't think Beloved has skill naturally. Like, I don't think there's a skill talent with the Fool.
No.
So I don't think he would have been able to touch Girl on Dragon and do anything without silver, because he doesn't have that innate ability of skill without the silver present. And then with Fitz, I don't know, maybe you're right. Maybe it did have to be the silver touching to give his feelings away. But doesn't he go to Girl on Dragon in his own body at one point and touch her and give her stuff? And whenever he's touching her, Verity tells him to get away.
I don't remember exactly, I guess, but I thought it was when they had swapped bodies.
Well,
I could be wrong. I know he does walk over to the Fool when the Fool's at Girl on Dragon when they have swapped bodies.
Yes. I don't know.
But yeah, in my mind, the silver is needed to make the memories go into the dragons. It is absolutely needed in my mind. Somebody could carve something out of the skill stone, but they wouldn't, it would just be a statue. So I think that intention, that connection with the skill is needed. That's my headcanon, at least.
Fair. Yeah. I guess I just feel like if you have enough skill anyway, you're going to be able to touch that intention and meld the stone
maybe.
Or whatever you're doing. I don't know.
And that's maybe how, maybe it's kind of a combination. That's coteries in the past didn't use silver, and they had so many people they could do that. But
yeah, and we have no idea, obviously, because
it's a little bit nebulous.
Yeah, we don't really know how they were made before Fitz was around. I mean, I guess we got that little tiny glimpse with Malta whenever she was absorbing all the memories, because the room that they were in was where they were making some of the statues.
That was an Elderling thing, though.
Yeah. So, and she didn't really mention any silver, but that doesn't mean anything because she wouldn't have known what it is.
Right.
But yeah, no, I don't know. I think it's hard to know, but I'm still sticking with I think it's possible, and you're allowed to disagree.
So that kind of brings Corey around to the main topic of Paragon then, with that recarving. Corey was discussing with a friend about reading Paragon through the lens of mental illness and how Paragon is kind of struggling with self-identity, and they're not an expert at anything, but they kind of came up in that discussion as a parallel for borderline personality disorder. and just being uncertain of the world around you and having that lack of self-worth and things like that. So when Corey's friend was talking about that, then Corey listened to what Emma was suggesting about Paragon becoming more stable after Amber had recarved him, and something clicked for Corey. Remember that the way silver gives form to material is that it remembers and reminds it of what it used to, or what is supposed to be. An artist will persuade it to have a certain form through appeals to beauty and emotion, and that is how the object takes on the form intended by the creator. And a live ship's mind is their body to a much greater extent than for most beings, so it follows that this action performed on their body will be reflected in their personality. So then Corey talks about how the traumatizing event of Kennit chopping away at Paragon's face affected their psyche much more than just the trauma of it.
And just being blinded.
It was a combo of both, because it's a constant reminder that they failed to protect someone that they loved. And it kind of seeped into their body that way. So when Amber recarved someone as someone who could be loved, that reaffirmed to Paragon that they could now be loved. And it was Paragon's choice to let that in. So Paragon is choosing to change, is choosing something better for themselves.
Yeah, I think that's my favorite aspect of Corey's ideas here, is that it's not just something that Amber has done to Paragon.
Mm-hmm.
It is something that Paragon had to want and allow, I guess, in a way. A lot like how mental health struggles, like somebody who struggles with mental health cannot be fixed just by having loved ones and friends in their corner. It definitely helps to not make things worse, to have people in your corner that love and care about you. But ultimately, if you don't want to get better, nothing anybody else does will ever be enough to make things better. It has to be a choice that you yourself are making to work at getting better. And I think that phrasing it as Paragon's choice to allow someone like Amber to come in and reshape him in a way that is someone that is lovable, I think that's a really big step at accepting a lot and trying to get better. That's like their decision.
And with Corey talking about that kind of intent of the silver before Amber's touch of carving him into someone lovable, Paragon's silver keeps reminding himself of that, right? It keeps reinforcing that idea, and it turns all that that self-doubt into someone who can be trusted, who can be lovable, and who can live a normal life.
Right, and that there is unconditional
quote, unquote,
love.
According to Paragon.
Right. But also that unconditional love coming from Amber.
Yeah.
Whether or not it was on purpose, because of who Amber was carving, Beloved does have that unconditional love for Fitz.
Mm-hmm.
And it sort of is like transcending of a normal romantic relationship, which is how Beloved always talks about their feeling for Fitz. Yeah. And so I think that obviously would also rub off unintentionally in the artistry of making the face be this person that Beloved loves so much.
Yeah. So, yeah, even on top of Amber and Paragon's connection before that we were talking about in previous episodes about them trusting one another with their secrets, but also maintaining that sense of self and not lowering their guard all the way, this might have strengthened that bond even more, which, in totality, I like the theory a lot.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that kind of, because it follows a logical thought through all the magic. So I really, really like it.
Yeah. I also like it a lot. So thank you, Corey, for writing in and letting us know what you thought about the ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you to everyone who always writes in. We love hearing from you guys. We love knowing your thoughts and ideas and questions about all of the things that are Realm of the Elderlings. And we look forward to hearing from you next week.